In recent times, it has become increasingly evident that the influence of the United States is ceding ground on the global stage, not because of one or two unsuccessful decisions, but as a result of a systemic shift driven by the America First policy under Donald Trump. The trade war with the People's Republic of China, the imposition of extraordinary tariffs, the rupture of traditional alliances, and the refusal to honor near-binding commitments have all formed an alarming picture. The United States is gradually becoming a country that disregards the interests even of its oldest allies. And while Washington focuses on slamming doors, Beijing skillfully exploits the openings to build ties with those losing faith in American stability. One of those long-standing allies that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States for decades as a reliable partner in the Middle East is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has traditionally been a steadfast friend, relied upon by the United States through joint military projects, massive purchases of American weapons, regional support, and intelligence sharing. However, analysts note that this friendship is now being tested. The kingdom is carefully turning toward China, recognizing that exclusive loyalty to Washington could become a serious liability. Yes, Trump recently visited Saudi Arabia, initiating major deals and declaring the revival of American influence in the kingdom and the region. But behind this ceremonial visit lies a more subtle game. Saudi Arabia, observing how the Trump administration increasingly prioritizes its own interest over those of its allies, and realizing that a decline in its American partner's popularity could leave it out in the cold, is betting on a backup option. And that option is China. According to reputable publications and insider sources, the kingdom has already begun expanding its economic and technological cooperation with China. China is being invited as a partner in infrastructure projects, energy, and technology. Although Saudi Arabia officially continues to declare its allegiance to the United States, balancing between East and West has become the new style of the kingdom's foreign policy. The key moment came in response to Trump's announcement of 100% tariffs on Chinese imports, scheduled to take effect on the 1st of November according to internal sources. The kingdom reportedly made a move that Washington interpreted as a serious signal. The Saudi crown prince, according to insiders, publicly stated that 100% tariffs would lead nowhere good and that countries must respect each other's interests. But diplomatic sources emphasize that this was not all. The kingdom offered China alternative trade routes to minimize the impact of the tariffs if they are enforced. For the Trump administration, this was a hard signal. One of the United States' key allies is not merely expressing discontent with American policy, but acting pragmatically, building a contingency strategy. So far, there has been no official response from Washington. Perhaps the signal is not strong enough, or is being assessed internally. But the mere fact of such a step is troubling to American strategists. It is important to understand that Saudi Arabia remains within the U.S. sphere of influence. Security, weapons purchases, access to American technologies and markets are still significant. But the once unshakable sphere of influence is beginning to fade. If loyal allies start looking toward China, the message is clear. The old system's stability no longer exists. And if the United States continues to rely on heavy tariffs, isolationism, and an America First approach while ignoring the interests of its partners, the world is quietly reorganizing. China, in contrast, is advancing through economic incentives, infrastructure investments, and technological partnerships, taking advantage of the fact that many countries do not want to become hostages of American policy. It cannot be said that the situation will change overnight. The process is gradual and multi-layered. But the years when the United States could dictate the rules, change partners at will, and maintain leadership without looking back are coming to an end. Washington understands this, which is why talk of returning to strategies of partnership, alliances, and containing China is growing louder. However, the response has not yet become as visible as some would like. In the end, the United States under Trump, by focusing on the trade war and a policy that increasingly disregards the interests of its allies, risks losing its dominance. Saudi Arabia is one of the clearest examples of how an old partner begins to look for alternative paths and diversify its ties. And China is ready to seize the moment. If this scenario continues, we may witness a transformation of global geopolitics, alliances will be redrawn, influence will shift, and America, long accustomed to being the center, may find itself as one of the players rather than the driving force. But the real turning point in the relationship between Washington and Riyadh came when it became clear that the US-China trade war is not a temporary flare-up, but a new long-term strategy. Sources close to Saudi Arabia's National Security Council report that special working groups have already been created inside the country to study the possibility of partially shifting oil trade from the dollar to the yuan, a step that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. According to analysts from Reuters and The Economist, the Saudis are actively discussing with Beijing the launch of pilot settlements in digital yuan for oil supplies to Asia. Officially, this is framed as a matter of logistical and financial convenience, but in practice, it signals to the world that an alternative to the dollar system, in which the United States has always held monopoly power, is emerging. Such developments cannot help but alarm the White House. According to insiders at the State Department, the Trump administration is already preparing an internal report for the National Security Council on how the trade war could undermine the financial hegemony of the dollar in the Persian Gulf states. In the document, a copy of which was obtained by Financial Times journalists, the need to reassess the strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia is outlined, and for the first time, the phrase "threat of losing trust" has appeared in official memoranda. Meanwhile, China is not wasting time. High-level delegations from Beijing are regularly arriving in Riyadh, offering not only investments, but also technology. As part of the Belt and Road Initiative, Saudi Arabia is considering participating in the construction of transport corridors, linking the Middle East and Asia without US involvement. According to South China Morning Post, these are joint infrastructure projects that could reshape the global trade map in the long run. For Trump and his administration, all this sounds like a challenge, but instead of diplomacy, the White House is choosing pressure, threats to freeze arms deliveries and reconsider military protection agreements. And yet, as The Guardian notes, the tactic of ultimatums stops working where alternatives appear. Saudi Arabia no longer feels dependent. It has China, which has enough resources to compensate for losses from a break with Washington. Against this backdrop, America increasingly looks less like a leader and more like a player that has lost its sense of proportion. The world no longer fears its sanctions and threats. Sanctions lose their power when too many learn to bypass them. Chinese banks are creating parallel payment systems. Arab countries are trading oil in yuan, and European corporations quietly continue working with Beijing despite pressure from Washington. And while Trump assures his audience that America is great again, analysts are asking whether an era is beginning in which greatness is no longer measured by military strength or the number of aircraft carriers, but by the ability to keep friends and partners. Because this is exactly where Washington faces its most serious problems today.